The war had lasted 300 years. 17 different species from across the galaxy had sent their warriors to fight. And 17 species had watched their people die in numbers too large to count. The enemy was called the Vreth, and they were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. The Vreth were insects. They stood on 6 legs, with hard shells covering their bodies and mandibles that could cut through metal. Their warrior caste grew to nearly 2 meters tall, and they felt no fear, no pain, and no mercy. They bred in massive underground hives, and their queens could produce thousands of eggs every single day. For every Vreth that died in battle, 10 more were born to take its place. They did not negotiate. They did not make treaties. They simply consumed. Every world they conquered was stripped of all life. The populations were used as food for the growing hives. 47 inhabited worlds had fallen to them over the centuries, and trillions of beings had died screaming in the dark. High Chancellor Torvin stood before the Galactic Coalition Assembly, his forearms spread wide in desperation. He was a Selthi, a tall creature, with blue-gray skin and compound eyes that reflected light in strange patterns. His species had already lost 2 homeworlds to the Vreth, and he knew that if something did not change soon, they would lose everything else. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from every coalition species. The aquatic north floated in their water tanks, their tentacles gesturing as they spoke through translation devices. The crystalline Vesh stood motionless, their bodies humming with electromagnetic communication. The mammalian Korath sat in rows, their fur bristling with anxiety. They had all come to hear the same thing. They had all come to discuss the same impossible question. How do you win a war against an enemy that cannot be stopped? Torvin spoke slowly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The coalition had tried everything. They had sent their greatest fleets, their most advanced weapons, their bravest warriors. Nothing had worked. The Vreth kept coming, kept breeding, kept consuming. It was like fighting the tide. But Torvin had an idea. It was a desperate idea, born from months of studying a species that most of the galaxy had ignored. A young species. A primitive species. A species that had only achieved faster than light. Traveled 40 years ago and still lived on a single world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, humanity. The assembly murmured when he said the name. Ambassador Yeel of the North clicked her translation device in what might have been laughter. She asked what a species of primitives could possibly offer to a war that had defeated the greatest. Civilizations in the galaxy, Torvin told them. He told them about human history. He told them about the wars humanity had fought against itself, long before they had ever left their planet. He told them about conflicts that had killed millions in single battles. About weapons that could destroy entire cities in a flash of light. About campaigns of systematic destruction that had reshaped continents. The assembly fell silent. No other known species had industrialized warfare the way humans had. No other species had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing their own kind. The Selthi had fought wars, yes, but never on such a scale. The North had conflicts, but they resolved them through negotiation. The Korath had battles, but they followed strict codes of honor that limited casualties. Humans had no such limitations. They fought to win, and they did not stop until victory was achieved or they were all dead. Torvin proposed that the coalition send a message to Earth. They would offer humanity everything they wanted in exchange for military assistance. Full technology transfer, colonization rights to habitable worlds, permanent seats on the governing council, whatever it took to bring the humans into the war. The vote was close, but it passed. On Earth, the message arrived at the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva. Admiral Catherine Price read it 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. She was a small woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much in her 60 years of life. She had commanded ships, led fleets, and buried more soldiers than she could count. She called her command. Staff together. General Marcus Cole was the first to arrive. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had fought in 3 ground wars before being promoted to strategic command. and he still walked with a slight limp from shrapnel that had torn through his leg 20 years ago. Colonel Linda Shaw came next. She was younger than the others, in her early 40s, with dark skin and a mind that worked faster than most computers. She had designed half of the tactical systems the military used and had written the book on combined arms doctrine. Admiral Price showed them the message. The coalition was desperate. The Vreth were winning. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the galaxy was asking humanity for help. General Cole read the intelligence reports on the Vreth. He studied their tactics, their biology, their history of conquest. He asked questions about their weaknesses, their command structure, their patterns of behavior. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. He said that the Vreth fought like insects because they were insects. They had numbers and aggression, but they did not adapt well to unexpected situations. Their hive mind made them coordinated, but it also made them predictable. If you disrupted their command structure, killed their queens, and hit them faster than they could breed replacements, you could beat them. It would not be easy. It would cost lives, probably many lives. But it could be done. Admiral Price asked how many soldiers they should send. The coalition had requested volunteers, probably expecting a few thousand at most. Cole looked at her with those stone-gray eyes. He said they should not send volunteers. Volunteers would be too cautious, too concerned with survival. This mission required something different. This mission required soldiers who understood that some wars were worth dying for. He said they should send the enforcers. The room went quiet. The enforcers were not a single unit. They were a classification, a designation given to the most effective and most ruthless soldiers humanity had ever produced. Special forces, black operations teams, veterans of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Men and women who had been trained to accomplish their missions regardless of cost, regardless of casualties, regardless of anything except victory. There were 3 million of them scattered across Earth's military forces. Admiral Price thought about it for a long time. She thought about the lives that would be lost, the horrors that would be committed, the darkness that humanity would unleash upon the galaxy. And then she thought about the trillions of beings who would die if they did nothing. She gave the order. 3 days later, the first human ships began their journey to the stars. They carried soldiers who knew exactly what they were being asked to do. They carried weapons that had been designed for one purpose only. They carried the hope of a desperate galaxy and the fear of everyone who understood what was coming. The Vreth had conquered 47 worlds. They had killed trillions of beings. They had never been defeated. They had also never faced humanity. That was about to change. The Coalition fleet had gathered at a staging point near the Kerith Nebula, a swirling cloud of purple and gold gas that stretched across light years of empty space. 2,000 ships floated in formation, representing the combined military power of 17 species. They were beautiful vessels, with curved hulls and elegant designs that reflected centuries of artistic tradition. Then the humans arrived. The ships that emerged from hyperspace were nothing like the Coalition fleet. They were ugly. They were brutal. They were covered in weapon batteries and armor plating with no curves or elegance anywhere in their design. They looked like they had been built for one purpose only. And that purpose was not to impress anyone with their beauty. The flagship was called the Dawnhammer. It was painted matte black, and it was enormous. It dwarfed even the largest Coalition vessels, stretching nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was scarred from previous battles. Its weapon systems were already powered and tracking potential threats. Commander Nathan Ellis stood on the bridge, watching the alien vessels on his displays. He was 38 years old, with short brown hair and a scar running down his left cheek. That scar had come from a knife fight in a city called Snow Hollow, back when he had been a different kind of soldier. Before the military had recruited him, before they had made him into what he was now, he was an enforcer. He had killed more people than he could remember, and he had learned to live with that weight a long time ago. Lieutenant Diana Vance reported that they were receiving transmissions from multiple Coalition vessels. She was young, barely 25, but she had proven herself reliable under pressure. Ellis told her to put them through. The main screen filled with the face of a Selthi admiral. Fleet Admiral Karath was old, even by Selthi standards. With faded blue skin and compound eyes that had seen 2 centuries of war, he welcomed the human vessels to the staging area and explained that quarters had been prepared for the human soldiers aboard coalition troop transports. The human ships would be assigned to the defensive perimeter while their commanders learned coalition tactical protocols. Ellis looked at his executive officer, his commander Patricia Dunn. She was a stocky woman with red hair and freckles. She had been his second in command for 5 years. She raised an eyebrow, and Ellis understood exactly what she was thinking. He turned back to the screen and told Admiral Korath that there had been a misunderstanding. The humans were not there to integrate into the coalition command structure. They were not there to learn coalition protocols. They were there to end the war. Korath's mandibles clicked in confusion. He did not understand what Ellis meant. Ellis explained. In 48 hours, the human fleet was going to launch an assault on Nexer Prime, one of the primary Vreth-breeding worlds. The coalition could join them if they wanted to. But the humans were going, with or without support. The transmission ended, and Ellis could imagine the chaos erupting on the coalition flagship. Let them panic, he thought. They would understand soon enough. Aboard his command ship, Admiral Korath turned to his aide and demanded to know how many human vessels there were. The aide checked his sensors and reported 217 warships, plus troop carriers. Korath asked how many soldiers. The aide looked at his datapad for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his expression was something Korath had never seen before. 3 million, he said. The humans had brought 3 million soldiers. Korath sat down heavily in his command chair. In all his years of war, he had never seen a force that size assembled for a single operation. The coalition typically deployed forces of a few 100,000. And even those campaigns took years to organize. The humans had done it in weeks. Over the next 2 days, coalition observers were granted permission to board human vessels and study their preparations. What they saw changed everything they thought they knew about warfare. Ambassador Yiel of the North walked through the corridors of a human troop carrier. Her tentacles wrapped around a translation device. She had expected to find nervous soldiers preparing for battle, perhaps praying or writing letters to their families. Instead, she found calm efficiency. The human soldiers moved through their routines with mechanical precision. They checked their weapons, tested their armor, studied holographic maps of the target. They did not seem afraid. They did not seem excited. They simply worked, preparing for what was to come, as if it were just another day. She stopped to speak with one of them, a young woman named Kelly Santos. Santos was cleaning her rifle, her fingers moving automatically over the familiar components. Yiel asked if she was afraid of the coming battle. Santos looked at her with brown eyes that held no warmth. She said that fear was a choice. You could let it control you, or you could use it as fuel. The enforcers had learned a long time ago that fear was just another tool. Yiel asked what happened if the battle went badly. What happened if they were outnumbered, overwhelmed, facing certain death? Santos smiled, but it was not a happy smile. She said that every soldier in the Enforcer program had signed the same document before deployment. It stated that they understood their mission might require their deaths, and that they accepted that possibility without reservation. They were not there to survive. They were there to win. The night before the assault, Admiral Korath requested a meeting with Commander Ellis. They met in a conference room aboard the Dawn Hammer. Surrounded by holographic displays showing the target planet, Korath asked Ellis a question that had been bothering him since the humans arrived. He asked why humanity had agreed to help. The coalition had offered payment, yes, but the humans could have demanded more. They could have waited for better terms. Instead, they had mobilized their entire military force and deployed within weeks. Ellis was quiet for a moment. Then he told Korath a story. 300 years ago, before humanity had achieved space travel, there had been a war on Earth. It was called the Second World War, and it had killed over 70 million people. One group had tried to conquer the world and had committed horrible atrocities in the process. The other nations of Earth had come together to stop them, not because they had anything to gain, but because some things were simply too evil to be allowed to exist. The Vreth were the same, Ellis said. They were a threat that could not be negotiated with or contained. They would keep consuming worlds until there was nothing left. Someone had to stop them. Humanity had the ability to do it, so they would. Korath asked if Ellis truly believed they could win. The Vareth had been fighting for 3 centuries. They had never been defeated. Ellis looked at him with those cold, empty eyes. He said that the Vareth had never fought humans before. They had faced species that valued survival over victory. They had faced species with codes of honor and rules of engagement. They had faced species that would retreat when the odds turned against them. Humans were different. The next morning, 217 human warships and nearly 1,000 coalition vessels jumped to hyperspace. Their destination was Nexar Prime, a world that had been producing Vreth warriors. For over a century, the Vreth had a garrison of 2 million warriors there. The humans were bringing 3 million soldiers, and none of those soldiers planned to retreat. The fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 217 human warships and nearly 1,000 coalition vessels faced the Vreth defense grid, a network of orbital platforms and patrol ships that had turned back every attack for the past 80 years. The coalition commanders expected a long battle. They expected careful maneuvering, tactical withdrawals, and gradual advancement. They expected the kind of war they had been fighting for 3 centuries. The humans had other plans, Commander. Ellis gave a single order from the bridge of the Dawnhammer. All batteries, open fire. The human ships unleashed everything they had. Missiles streaked across the void by the thousands. Energy weapons carved through Vreth patrol ships like hot knives through paper. The orbital platforms designed to withstand conventional coalition assaults crumpled under the concentrated firepower of vessels that had been built for maximum destruction. In 17 minutes, the orbital defenses were gone. The landing began immediately. Dropships fell from the bellies of the troop carriers, plunging through the atmosphere in waves of fire and metal. The Vreth had prepared ground defenses, expecting a slow orbital bombardment, followed by cautious landings. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to have no concept of caution. Sergeant Danny Martinez was in the 3rd wave. He was a short man with dark hair and a face that had been weathered by too many years and too many wars. He had grown up in a small town in Texas, joined the military at 18, and had been killing people for his country ever since. He was 34 years old and had no illusions about what he was. His dropship hit the ground hard. The ramp dropped before the dust had settled. Martinez was moving before his boots touched alien soil. His rifle already seeking targets, the Vreth were everywhere. They poured out of tunnel entrances, their mandibles clicking in that terrible rhythm that meant they were coordinating an attack. The warrior caste were huge, nearly 2 meters of armored insect flesh, with claws that could tear through standard body armor. But the human soldiers were not wearing standard body armor. The Enforcer combat suits were the product of decades of research and development. They were powered exoskeletons that multiplied human strength by a factor of 10 and could withstand direct hits from most conventional weapons. They were equipped with integrated targeting systems, communication networks, and enough ammunition to sustain hours of continuous combat. Martinez fired 3 rounds into the first Breath warrior that charged him. The armor-piercing bullets punched through its carapace, and the creature collapsed in a heap of broken chitin. He was already moving to the next target before it hit the ground. Around him, his squad moved in perfect coordination. Private Kelly Santos covered the left flank, her rifle spitting death in short, controlled bursts. Corporal Luis Ramirez took the right, his heavy weapon tearing through clusters of enemies. Private First Class Tony Wu brought up the rear, watching for attacks from behind. They pushed forward. The coalition observers, who had been assigned to human units, recorded everything they saw. Later, when they compiled their reports, they would use words like relentless and terrifying and unstoppable. But in the moment, all they could do was try to keep up with soldiers who moved like machines. Designed for a single purpose, the human assault was not just about ground forces. Above the battlefield, aircraft screamed through the smoke-filled sky, delivering precision strikes on Vreth concentrations. Orbital platforms rained fire on enemy reinforcement routes. Artillery units set up positions and began pounding the hive entrances with shells that could level buildings. This was combined arms doctrine, the art of coordinating every available weapon system into a single, overwhelming assault. The Coalition had never mastered it. Their species fought as separate units, each with their own traditions and tactics. The humans fought as one, every element supporting every other element in a symphony of destruction. But the real horror was happening below the surface. Lieutenant Christopher Kane led his team through the underground tunnels, far from the chaos of the main battle. His unit was called the Executioners, and they had a very specific mission. They were hunting. Queen's Kane was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that never seemed to blink. He moved through the darkness in absolute silence, his specialized equipment detecting the pheromone signatures of high-value targets. His team followed behind him, 7 soldiers who had been selected for their ability to do terrible things without hesitation. They found the first queen chamber after 2 hours of careful navigation. The queen was enormous, a bloated mass of flesh surrounded by thousands of eggs. Worker drones attended to her, carrying nutrients and cleaning her massive body. She had been laying eggs for 60 years and had produced millions of warriors. Kane gave the signal. His team moved with perfect precision. Charges were placed at structural weak points. The queen never even knew they were there until the explosions tore through her chamber, killing her and destroying every egg within 100 meters. By the end of the first day, the Executioners had eliminated 47 queens. Above ground, the battle raged on. The Vreth fought with desperate fury, throwing wave after wave of warriors at the human positions. But the humans did not break. They did not retreat. They simply held their ground and killed everything that came at them. Sergeant Martinez found himself in a collapsed tunnel, surrounded by dead Vreth and dying soldiers. His ammunition was running low and reinforcements were still 10 minutes away. A Vreth warrior charged out of the darkness, and he met it with the butt of his rifle, smashing its head in with 3 brutal swings. He looked down at the dead alien and felt nothing. That was what years of war did to you. It stripped away everything except the instinct to survive and the knowledge of how to kill. Captain Susan Drake coordinated the assault from a mobile command post, 2 kilometers behind the front lines. She was 42 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and a voice that could cut through any chaos. She had commanded the assault on 4 different worlds before this one, and she knew exactly what she was asking her soldiers to do. She watched the casualty report scroll across her display. 18,000 dead in the first 24 hours. Coalition observers were horrified by the numbers, but Drake had seen worse. Much worse. She opened a channel to all units. Objective Alpha secured. Push to Objective Bravo. No one stops until the queens are dead. The soldiers obeyed. On the second day, human forces reached the primary breeding chambers, massive underground complexes that had been producing Vreth warriors for a century. The fighting there was brutal. Close quarters combat in tunnels, too narrow for vehicles and too dark for most sensors. The humans adapted. They brought flamethrowers, grenades, and close combat weapons. They fought with knives when they ran out of ammunition, and with their bare hands when the knives broke. They died by the hundreds, and they kept coming. By the third day, the Vreth garrison was broken. Commander Ellis walked through the ruins of the primary hive complex, stepping over the bodies of dead warriors. The smell was indescribable, a mixture of alien blood and burning chitin and something else that he could not identify. Behind him, Coalition officers followed in stunned silence. Admiral, Korath asked how many soldiers they had lost. Ellis checked his display. 42,000 dead. Another 60,000 wounded. Korath's mandibles clicked in horror. Such losses were unthinkable by Coalition standards. An operation that cost even 10% casualties was considered a disaster. Ellis looked at him with those empty eyes. He said that the Vreth had lost over 2 million warriors and 93 queens. At that ratio, humanity would sacrifice every soldier. They had brought and still considered the operation a success. Korath asked if humans truly had no value for their own lives. Ellis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that humans valued their lives very much, but they valued victory more. And sometimes, the only path to victory ran through hell. The battle for Nexar Prime was over. The war was just beginning. The fall of Nexar Prime sent shockwaves through the Vreth Dominion. For the first time in their species' collective memory, they had lost a breeding world. The high mind, the vast network of pheromone signals and neural connections that linked every Vreth in the galaxy, struggled to process what had happened. They had lost battles before. They had lost ships and warriors and even minor outposts. But they had never lost a breeding world. They had never faced an enemy that could do what the humans had done. The surviving queens communicated across light years of space. Their pheromone messages translated through specialized relay organisms. They tried to understand the new enemy, to find patterns in their behavior that could be exploited. They found nothing useful. The humans did not fight like prey. They did not retreat when outnumbered, did not surrender when surrounded, did not negotiate when they had the advantage. They simply attacked and attacked, and attacked until their enemies were dead. The High Mind made a decision it had never made before. It ordered a retreat. The Vreth fleets fell back toward their core systems, abandoning worlds they had held for centuries. The Coalition watched in amazement as territories that had been contested for generations suddenly fell silent. Patrol ships vanished. Garrison forces withdrew. For the first time in 300 years, the Vreth were running. General Marcus Cole arrived at the forward command post on the recently liberated world of Taros 4. The planet had been under Veth occupation for 60 years, and its native population had been reduced to livestock for the hive. The survivors had spent decades hiding in underground bunkers. Emerging only to scavenge for food, Commander Patricia Dunn met him at the landing zone. Her uniform was stained with blood and ash, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She had not slept in 3 days. Cole asked for a status report. Dunn told him that the planet was secured. All Veth presence had been eliminated, and defensive perimeters had been established around the major population centers. She paused, searching for the right words. The survivors, she said, were more than grateful. They had believed they were forgotten. They had believed they would die in the dark, consumed by insects that saw them as nothing more than food. Then the humans came. Cole looked out over the ruined cityscape. Fires still burned in the distance, columns of black smoke rising into the alien sky. The air smelled like death and destruction. But among the ruins he could see people emerging from their hiding places. Thin, starving people with hollow eyes and trembling hands. They looked up at the human soldiers with expressions that Cole had seen before, on other worlds. In Other Wars Hope, he asked how many soldiers they had lost taking the planet. 8,000, Dunn replied. Cole nodded. 8,000 lives. He had commanded operations that lost more in a single hour. But each one of those 8,000 had been a person with a name and a history, and people who would mourn them. He told Dunn to make sure their names were recorded. Every single one. The Coalition began to reassess humanity. Where they had once seen primitives, they now saw something else entirely. Ambassador Yiel of the North sent a classified report to her government that would later become one of the most studied documents in galactic history. She wrote that the humans did not wage war the way other species understood it. They waged war like a force of nature, like a storm or an earthquake or a plague. They did not hate their enemies, but they would kill them without hesitation. They mourned their dead, but they did not let that mourning slow them down. They were afraid, but they had learned to transform their fear into fuel for their determination. She concluded that the Coalition had made a terrible mistake in underestimating them. She also wrote that this mistake might be the thing that saved the galaxy. On Earth, the news of the victory sparked celebrations that lasted for days. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage. They had faced an enemy that had terrorized the stars for 3 centuries, and they had won. But the military command knew the truth. The Vereth were not defeated. They were regrouping, rebuilding, preparing for the next phase of the war. If humanity allowed them time to recover, they would come back stronger than before. The breeding worlds would produce new warriors, new queens, new fleets. In a generation, perhaps 2, the Vereth would be ready to resume their conquest. Commander Ellis stood before the combined fleet, human and coalition vessels alike. The holographic display showed the Vereth fleet withdrawing toward their core systems, a massive concentration of ships protecting the homeworld. He told them that the Vereth thought the war was over. They thought they could retreat, rebuild their numbers, and return in a generation to finish what they had started. He looked around at the assembled officers, human and alien alike. He told them that humanity was not going to give the Vereth that chance. He proposed that they follow the retreating enemy. He proposed that they hit the Vereth homeworld, their shipyards, their remaining breeding planets. He proposed that they end the Vereth as a threat to the galaxy permanently. Ambassador Yeel spoke up. She said what Ellis was proposing was genocide. Ellis turned to face her. He acknowledged that she was correct. Then he asked her how many worlds the Vereth had consumed over the past 300 years. How many trillions of sentient beings had been killed, their bodies used as food for the hive. He reminded her that the Vereth did not negotiate, did not coexist, did not do anything except consume. If the Coalition let them survive, they would come back. Maybe not in the current generation, but eventually. And when they returned, humanity might not be there to stop them. The silence in the room was heavy with the weight of the decision before them. Finally, Admiral Koreth spoke. He said that the Coalition had been fighting this war for 3 centuries. They had lost worlds. They had lost entire species. They had watched civilizations burn while their fleets retreated and their politicians negotiated. If there was a chance to truly end this, to make sure no more worlds would fall to the Vereth, then the Coalition would take that chance. He straightened his forearms in a gesture of resolution. He said that the Coalition would follow the humans. They would see this war through to the end. Whatever that end might be, the vote among the Coalition commanders was nearly unanimous. Only a handful abstained, and none voted against the proposal. The campaign to end the Vereth Dominion began immediately. Human and Coalition forces pushed into territory that had been enemy-held for centuries. World after world fell to the combined assault, each victory bringing them closer to the Vereth homeworld. The Vereth fought back with desperate fury. They knew, in whatever passed for their collective consciousness, that they were fighting for their survival as a species. They threw everything they had at the advancing forces, sacrificing millions of warriors to slow the assault. It was not enough, the humans had learned. Something in their thousands of years of warfare. They had learned that the hardest part of winning was not the fighting. It was the decision to keep fighting when the costs seemed too high, when the losses seemed too great. When every instinct screamed at you to stop, the humans had made that decision long ago, and they were not going to stop. Now, not until the Vereth were finished, not until the galaxy was safe, not until the job was done. The final campaign lasted 18 months. Combined human and Coalition forces pushed deep into Vereth territory, advancing through systems that had been enemy strongholds for centuries. World after world fell to the assault, each victory marked by the same terrible arithmetic of lives spent and objectives achieved. Sergeant Kelly Santos had changed since the assault on Nexer Prime. She was no longer the nervous private who had asked her sergeant about fear before her first battle. Now, she was a hardened veteran, leading her own squad through the tunnels of yet another hive world. Her movements were automatic, the product of countless hours of training and countless more hours of combat. She knew the sound of Vereth warriors approaching, could identify different castes by the rhythm of their clicking mandibles, could navigate the twisting underground passages as easily as the streets of her hometown in California. The squad moved in perfect formation, covering each other as they advanced toward the primary objective. Another queen, another breeding chamber, another step toward ending the war. Then something unexpected happened. A Vreth worker drone appeared in the tunnel ahead of them. It was unarmed, its small body trembling as it approached, and it was carrying something white. Waving it back and forth like a flag of surrender, Santos raised her fist, halting the squad. Her fingers stayed on the trigger, but she did not fire. The drone moved closer, its mandibles clicking in a pattern her translator struggled to interpret. Finally, words emerged from the device, broken and halting, but understandable. "We surrender. No more fight, please. No more." Santos had never heard of Vreth speak before. She had not known they could. Reports came in from across the front lines. Vreth were surrendering in unprecedented numbers. Warriors laid down their weapons. Workers emerged from tunnels with white flags improvised from whatever materials they could find. For the first time in their species' history, the Vreth were giving up. The High Mind had made another impossible decision. Faced with the extinction of their species, it had conceived of a behavior no Vreth had ever exhibited before. Capitulation, Commander. Let's receive the formal surrender aboard the Dawn Hammer. A delegation of Vreth, led by one of the last surviving queens, came aboard under heavy guard. The queen was ancient, her carapace scarred from wounds sustained in wars fought before humanity had discovered fire. She looked at Ellis with compound eyes that held 3 centuries of memories. She spoke through her translator, her voice carrying the weight of a species accepting defeat. "You have defeated us. We did not believe it was possible. We have never been defeated." Ellis studied her in silence. This creature had ordered the deaths of countless billions. Under her command, worlds had been consumed and civilizations had been erased from existence. Justice, by any reasonable standard, demanded her extinction. He asked if she understood why they had lost. The queen considered the question. She said that by every measure the Vreth used to evaluate enemies, humanity should have been prey. Young species. Inferior technology. Limited numbers. Everything indicated they would be easy to consume. Ellis nodded slowly. He told her that the Vreth had measured the wrong things. They had counted ships and weapons and populations. They had not measured will. The queen asked what would happen now. Would the humans destroy them, the way the Vreth would have destroyed humanity if the situation were reversed? It was the question that had haunted Ellis throughout the campaign. He had seen the aftermath of Vreth conquests, the empty cities, and the mass graves, and the processing facilities. Where sentient beings had been converted into nutrients for the hive, he had walked through the ruins of civilizations that had existed for millennia. Before being consumed by these creatures, part of him wanted to give the order. Part of him wanted to finish what they had started and make sure the Vreth could never threaten anyone again. It would be easy. It would even be justified by most moral calculations. But Ellis had also seen something else during the campaign. He had seen Vreth workers caring for their young. He had seen drones tending to wounded warriors. He had seen, in their alien way, something that looked almost like compassion. He made his decision. He told the queen that the Vreth would be confined to their homeworld. Their space capability would be destroyed. They would be monitored for the rest of their species' existence, watched by permanent coalition garrisons. If they ever threatened another world, if they ever tried to expand beyond their planet, the humans would return. And next time, there would be no mercy. But they would not be destroyed. The queen's compound eyes studied him for a long moment. She asked why. The Vreth would have shown no such mercy to humanity. Ellis met her gaze. He said that was the difference between them. The war ended not with annihilation, but with containment. The Vreth remained on their homeworld, watched by a permanent garrison of human and coalition forces. Some in the galaxy called it weakness. Others called it wisdom. A few called it the most human thing humanity had ever done. General Marcus Cole retired to a small farm on one of the worlds. Humanity had been granted as payment for their service. He spent his remaining years growing vegetables and writing letters to the families of soldiers who had served under him. He never talked about the war, but sometimes at night he would sit on his porch and look up at the stars. Remembering the men and women who had died to make the galaxy safe, Admiral Catherine Price was elected Secretary General of the Reformed Coalition, the first human to hold the position. Under her leadership, The coalition began rebuilding the worlds that had been devastated by centuries of war. She worked until the day she died, trying to ensure that the sacrifices her soldiers had made would mean something. Commander Ellis returned to Earth. He never accepted the medals that were offered to him, never appeared at the ceremonies held in his honor. He lived quietly in a small apartment in a city that had not changed much in the years he was gone. Sometimes he would walk through the streets at night, watching ordinary people living ordinary lives, and he would think about everything he had done to protect them. Sergeant Kelly Santos left the military and went back to school. She studied xenobiology, spending her career trying to understand species like the Vreth so that future conflicts might be avoided. She married, had children, and grew old, surrounded by people who loved her. But she kept her combat armor in a closet, cleaned and ready, just in case. The galaxy remembered what humanity had done. They remembered the soldiers who had fought with terrifying efficiency, who had died by the hundreds of thousands without flinching, who had achieved in 2 years what the coalition had failed to achieve in 3 centuries. They called them the enforcers who became executioners, but they also remembered something else. They remembered that when humanity had the power to destroy an entire species, they chose not to. They remembered that the humans, these terrifying warriors who waged war like a force of nature, had looked at their defeated enemy and offered mercy instead of extinction. The records of the war were preserved in the archives of every coalition species. The tactics and strategies were studied by military academies across the galaxy. But the most important lesson was not about warfare. It was about choice. Humanity was capable of terrible things. They had proven that beyond any doubt. They could destroy worlds, end species, extinguish civilizations that had existed for millennia. When pushed to the edge, they became something that the galaxy had never seen before. But they were also capable of mercy. They could look at an enemy that deserved destruction and choose a different path. They see